Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, and welcome to this week's show. In this episode, I'm going to take a look at Venus in Scorpio. And in particular, I want to focus on some of the aspects that she is making towards the end of the month. So we are technically looking at the week starting November 22nd, and we're going to be casting our eyes over what Venus is in Scorpio is doing this last week of November. Mostly what that means I have my eye on is Venus in Scorpio forming a series of trine aspects with Jupiter in Cancer and with Saturn in Pisces. But there is also a sweet link from Venus to Mercury Retrograde in Scorpio that I'm going to mention briefly as well. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about my next webinar, which is all about Moon Saturn Aspects. I'm going to be teaching this webinar live on Saturday, November 29th. In this webinar, I'm going to share with you the ways that I work with Moon Saturn aspects, including the technical criteria that I consider, like orbs, and I'll also be sharing some of the counseling strategies, some of the conversations that I have with clients when talking about what a Moon Saturn aspect might be like, what it might be like to live with that, what kind of traits and characteristics that might lead to, and how we might provide healing from that as an adult. So we're talking a little bit about childhood and then how that affects adulthood. So this is all part of the Moon Saturn aspect experience, if you like. So I hope to see you in that webinar on the 29th of November. To find out more, or if you'd like to register, pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com. If you can't make the live webinar, you will get access to the video recording and slides. All right, so let's get back to this last week of November. There's a lot of astrology happening at the end of the month, but what I want to dive into is, I guess we could call them relational type aspects with Venus, and that's of course because Venus is involved, which means relationships. Our sense of love and beauty is going to be in the mix this week. So there's lots of things we can get into. So as we're getting started, we are talking about the aspects that Venus in Scorpio will be making. And I wanted to mention that in one of my earliest podcast episodes, all the way back in episode 24, I did do a deep dive on Venus in Scorpio. So check out that episode if you would like to understand more about the magic and mystery of what Venus in Scorpio might be about, or if you want to get some tips on working with Venus in Scorpio from that point of view of being technically in detriment. Today, in today's show, I'm going to focus on the aspects, the connections that Venus is involved in and how that might describe some of our experiences some of our experiences this week. So first up, let's mention that aspect I said I would touch on briefly, which is Venus conjunct Mercury retrograde. So this is kind of an underappreciated aspect. It is happening on Monday, November 24th, and Venus and Mercury retrograde will come together at 22 degrees of Scorpio. So as that aspect comes together, it's almost like Venus is offering Mercury some support. Mercury's retrograde. Mercury is also really slow right now. It's slowing down in advance of its station happening on the last weekend in November. So Venus is kind of moving more quickly than Mercury, which is a little unusual. And she's kind of here to buffer or to offer companionship. And so as Venus links to Mercury retrograde, it might actually look like having a friend by your side or not being alone as you are grappling with something that's on your mind. It might literally be talking something through with a trusted confidant, maybe even a healing or therapeutic practitioner. It might mean that you have some support as you navigate a complex situation. Venus with Mercury retrograde won't necessarily change the situation itself, but it does point to companionship, care, affection, and loyalty, so that even if you're struggling with something or you're really working through something intense, you're not alone as you're doing it. And even though Mercury is retrograde, Mercury is still trying to help Venus in Scorpio with her verbalizing or her expressing. And planets in Scorpio, like planets in any water sign, tend to struggle with saying things out loud. Water signs are quiet. Technically, they're known as mute signs. So they're not very talkative. And so with Mercury retrograde and Venus coming together, you may not say it out loud, but you might be having a lot of thoughts. You might be having some insights or realizations, especially about your relationships. And so as Mercury is trying to help Venus in Scorpio kind of give voice to her longings, that might bring forward themes to do with intense togetherness, intimacy, or even craving deeper connections. And that in turn, of course, might lead to, as you can imagine, some really rich conversations, maybe a healing or therapeutic exchange, or even a creative encounter. So that is a sweet and potentially thought-provoking aspect to kick off the week between Venus and Mercury retrograde, 22 Scorpio, on Monday, the 24th of November. So what's interesting is that after meeting with Mercury retrograde, Venus, of course, continues moving forward through the zodiac, through Scorpio. And it's on Wednesday that Venus will link up with Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces. So this would arguably be the featured aspect pattern of this last week of November. It's technically known as a grand trine configuration or alignment. And we have Venus at 24 Scorpio, trine Jupiter at 24 Cancer, and then also trine Saturn at 25 Pisces. So as Venus moves between 24 and 25 Scorpio, she trines Jupiter and then very quickly afterwards trines Saturn. So that is the kind of fairly auspicious, favorable pattern that we have forming midweek. It's on Wednesday, but Thursday in some locations. And I want to get into this grand trine pattern in a minute. But before we do, I want to share another point that I think is interesting here. What I think is interesting is that Venus links with Mercury and then moves from Mercury immediately to Jupiter and then quickly to Saturn. And so in this instance, Venus is almost carrying some of Mercury's maybe information, intelligence, data, or just the message, and then passing that on to Jupiter and then Saturn. And even though astrologers typically think of Mercury as the messenger, that is one of Mercury's core archetypes or motifs, in this instance, it's like Venus is playing that role of the courier. She is moving much more quickly than Mercury. So Venus picks up the influences of whatever Mercury retrograde in Scorpio has got going on and brings that to Jupiter and Saturn. So there is something here about what are the messages we're sharing, who is the courier or messenger that we are asking to deliver, the cravings or the desires or the message, and then to whom do we present our offer? Who are we presenting our request or our pitch to? This is just an interesting way of thinking about planetary movement. So as Venus comes to align with Jupiter and Saturn, they're all in water signs. It's Wednesday, maybe Thursday. There is lots of potential for healing, for connection, for clarity and resolution, especially in some of your most important and closest relationships. So we've got a lot of these qualities of interconnectedness, maybe even realizations around interdependence as well. So I think there's a lot of wisdom that we can tap into as Venus works with Jupiter and Saturn and kind of brings the resonance of Mercury retrograde to Jupiter and Saturn as well. So there's wisdom, there's realization, there's clarity about plans to make, priorities to settle on, and even promises to finalize. Inside this grand water trine between Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, it really is a lot of longing. There is craving. Venus in Scorpio is kind of like always wanting more depth, intensity, more loyalty, more intimacy. And so if you're wishing for greater depth with people in your closest relationships, like with friends or family, or of course your romantic partner, But also if you're seeking things like stability or a plan for the future, whether that's at work or in your relationships, these are things that are possible this week. Because with Venus working with Jupiter and Saturn, there's a sense of coming together to enjoy opportunities. Are you giving an opportunity? Are you receiving an opportunity? That's definitely Venus-Jupiter. There's a generosity of affection or support, encouragement. There's a generosity of emotion and feeling with Venus-Jupiter. And then with Venus-Saturn, we have this sense of stability and security, as if we're able to settle into a groove that we can carry on for the long term. Venus and Saturn are both interested in things that last. And here we see them really working together to solidify our emotional ties or our emotional connections. So we're definitely in the realm of feelings, being aware of our feelings, figuring out how we want to express or honor our feelings. But doing so can come with some really great rewards under this Venus-Jupiter-Saturn pattern that is forming. So if I was to kind of summarize it, this grand trine really has fortifying qualities. Venus in Scorpio can definitely use the wisdom and encouragement and the support and that sense of belonging to something bigger, which Jupiter in Cancer is able to offer. And Venus in Scorpio can really benefit from the clarity and the grounding and the sense of maybe worthiness that Venus-Saturn, when we have a trine aspect there, can help evoke. So that idea with Venus-Saturn, we're learning how to appropriately offer support and care without taking on more than we should. And we're also learning how to receive or ask for help that would share our load. So there's lots of the kind of real life lessons we get out of these planetary combinations. And so with this grand trine kind of really having fortifying qualities, strengthening qualities, grounding qualities, it can certainly help improve relationships or other kind of bonds of love and friendship that have been a bit wobbly. So if things have been a bit bumpy with someone special over the last few weeks as Venus has been going through Scorpio, you might find you're able to kind of get to the heart of the issue, or you're able to work through things so that you feel more calm or more secure, or you feel more like connected to what the plan for going forward is. Jupiter and Saturn are connected to these more substantial matters. They definitely both, for different reasons, want to make long-term plans. So at a very simple level, Venus working with both Jupiter and Saturn is like, we are locking in our future plans. Where are we going next? What are our goals? What are our dreams? What's the plan to help us get there? Whether that we is you and a loved one, like a romantic partner, a close friend, a relative, even a business colleague. So here we're sort of showing our loyalty and our sense of devotion to the bond that we share by being willing to look forward and to make commitments that we will follow through on. That's kind of all the things in here. Now, as I was thinking about this aspect, Venus, trine Jupiter, trine Saturn, this kind of grand trine pattern, I was reminded of a beautiful French phrase that I learned earlier this year when I took some French classes. And it has to do with how saying I miss you is expressed in French. And this was one of the most poetic things I remember learning in French class when my brain was totally scrambled with all of the verbs and the masculine and the feminine. It was a lot. But this piece stuck with me. And so in class, I learned that in French, there isn't a direct translation of I miss you. Instead, the French say tu me manques, which means you are missing from me. How beautiful is that? When a French person wants to express that they are missing you, what they actually say is that you are missing from me. And watching a movie this week, I was reminded of this phrase, and it stayed with me as I was reflecting on these aspects from Venus in Scorpio to Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces. I can't really explain how things come together in my mind, but they just they all went in at different points and came together in this sort of, they're connected place. And so as much as these Venus aspects to Jupiter and Saturn might help with clarity and commitment, because I do think that's something they're able to do, From Venus's position in Scorpio, I suspect that she's starting from a place of feeling as if something is missing from her due to this detriment factor of Venus in Scorpio. And it might be that what's missing is a person, a passion, a creative or a magical obsession, but there may be a sense that something isn't quite what it could or should be. And I wondered if we could take inspiration from this French phrase this week. Instead of exploring who might be missing from you, I wonder if you could sit with the idea of what might be missing from your heart. Maybe it is a who that is missing, but maybe it's a what as well. And this idea, of what is missing from me. So for you, I want you to think about, what is missing from me that in its absence creates a longing, a restlessness, maybe even an emptiness. And I don't ask you to reflect on this to get all upset about who or what might be missing from you. Instead, I invite you to consider the gaps or unmet needs that you might have. It can be hard to acknowledge a longing or a hole that we might have, but until you do, it's impossible to fill it. And this is where I think Venus in Scorpio gets great support, guidance, kind of access to wisdom, deeper understanding via these aspects with Jupiter and Saturn. And so these trines from Jupiter and Saturn to Venus in Scorpio, they can really provide support or encouragement or mentorship to help you seek that which you are secretly longing for, that which you may not have even known you were craving until Venus makes these aspects and gets that clarity or groundedness. So through this aspect pattern, yes, you might be able to, make some great plans for the future or improve things that haven't been so great. But part of that process might actually involve understanding what has been missing. You might get clarity about how to strengthen the relationships or the pleasures and the delights that really matter to you. And so when we think about this, grand trine aspect, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, I think we can end up in a place that is so much better and enjoyable than where we started. And for some of us, the road there might be a little smooth. And for others, the road there might require acknowledging what is missing and then realizing the importance of us having that missing thing brought in. And then we know what to focus on. So a grand trine pattern is considered favorable, sometimes even auspicious. And so you might enjoy a sense of completion or achievement under this aspect midweek, or you might even have this growing feeling of maybe satisfaction that a really substantial plan or a long-term project that you've been working on, you might have this sense of it's going to work out or it's going to succeed. We're going to be able to do this. And this is who we're going to do it with. This is how it's going to come together. And this is the timeline that we're all agreeing on and working towards. And this is kind of the place that I hope we can all get to, by the end of the week as Venus has moved through this beautiful combination of aspects with Jupiter and Saturn. I do have a couple of quick tips to share with you about how to connect this grand trine in the water signs to your own chart. Before I do, I want to give you early notice that I will be doing a holiday sale this week where you can save 20% off all my online astrology classes and webinars. You can save on your astrology studies with the code LIGHT20, and we will pop that in the show notes below. Pop over to callysastrology.com to save on your astrology studies. Make sure you enter that code LIGHT20 to save 20% off before you check out. I will also put the direct link in the show notes below as well. Okay, so if you're wondering how this kind of nourishing and potentially very healing Venus, Jupiter, Saturn grand trine might support your chart, here's 2 tips about how to bring this energy into your chart and therefore your life. First off, check the topics of the houses that hold the water signs in your chart. So look for the houses that have Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces on the cusp. These are the houses where the planets are making this pattern from. So Jupiter's in Cancer, of course, Venus is in Scorpio, and Saturn is in Pisces. And those placements are not new, but this configuration, this interaction, the energy and activation from this alignment, that's what's coming forward this week. Now, topics or matters around these areas of life, the house topics of your Cancer house, your Scorpio house, your Pisces house, they actually have been swirling around. They've been stimulated over the past few weeks as other planets, including Mercury and the Sun, have been moving through the late degrees of Scorpio and connecting with Jupiter and Saturn. So you might already be a little attuned to these parts of your chart and life. However, this week brings a fresh approach and perhaps a kind of out-of-the-box connection that might offer the potential for new cohesion and enjoyment to these three different topics or areas of your life. So there's something about the Cancer part of your chart and life, the Scorpio part of your chart and life, and the Pisces part of your chart and life working together or supporting each other, feeding off each other, creating these feedback loops that are improving things for each planet in those situations. So the first way to think about this aspect in your chart is to focus on the topics of the Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces houses and see how the pieces of those areas of life are supporting each other or coming together in new, more enjoyable ways. The second way to ground this aspect in your chart is via the houses ruled by Venus. So in this Venus-Jupiter-Saturn grand trine, Venus is the quickest moving planet, so she is the one that is most affected by the influence of Jupiter and Saturn. The grounding, the wisdom, the clarity, the opportunities, the support, the healing, all of that Venus is getting from Jupiter and Saturn. And what we want to do here is look at the houses where you have Taurus and Libra on the cusp. So these are the Venus houses in your chart, and these are the areas of your life that are managed by Venus. And so as Venus receives some of this stabilizing support from Saturn, the encouragement to focus on what matters or even long-term goals, long-term partnerships, which comes a little bit from Jupiter as well. This means that as Venus gets this help, the Taurus and Libra areas of your life get that help as well. And that means that you might be able to improve your experiences around the topics of the Taurus and Libra parts of your chart and life. So the Taurus and Libra topics, think about the houses of Taurus and Libra in your chart. Think about the people that you might interact with around those topics or settings in your life. And that's what you're going to be able to improve. You're going to be able to work with others, to build better partnerships, to create better opportunities, and generally create more enjoyment and stability in the Taurus and Libra parts of your chart and life. All right, team. So that is it from me for this really juicy aspect, very nourishing, very evocative, very much about bringing feelings to the surface for this final week of November as Venus in Scorpio trines Jupiter in Cancer and then Saturn in Pisces. I would love to hear how you're experiencing these Venus aspects in the comments below. So let me know your stories and experiences there. Thanks again for joining me. I will see you next time. Until then, take care.